Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest project from Denzel Curry called ZUU. So I'll admit, I wasn't really expecting this. Now granted, that might as well be a tagline for most of my experiences with Denzel Curry, from the smoked out, nerdier brand of hip-hop near his debut, to the hyper-aggressive but potent as hell bangers off of Imperial, to the more stylized and diverse sounds on Taboo. His sound has only expanded and shown deeper wells of potential to grab a bigger and bigger following. So I guess I'm not all that averse to the coming home party banger project that plays closer to a mixtape. Hell, at this point, he's probably earned that. Hell, one of my issues with Taboo is that the experimentation felt a little bit undercooked. So maybe streamlining on a back-to-basics mold, that could really work for him. And he's got a penchant for melody and hooks that puts many of his peers to shame, and on that back-to-basics mold, the hooks are all the more important. And really, considering how much I've been looking for a fun hip-hop project over the past couple of weeks, if he's gonna drop something looser and overloaded with summer bangers, I'm gonna be intrigued. I'm not sure I've heard Denzel Curry sound like he's having fun on an album in recent years, and I'm always conscious of the depth that he will slip in between the lines and probably doesn't get credit for. And while I'm not expecting him to give Sage Francis or B. Dolan a run for their money, given how fun they came off of This Was Supposed to Be Fun, I wanted to hear this regardless, and it was short enough to go down pretty easy, so alright. What did Denzel Curry deliver with ZUU? Well, alright, this review might wind up being a little bit short because there is a limit to how much you can really say about ZUU. It's a blunt wallop of blown out Miami-based hip-hop that Denzel Curry says he nearly entirely freestyled, only really wrote down one song, and I absolutely believe it. It's a project that could have easily been released as a party mixtape both now and 15 years ago, and nobody would have batted an eye. In fact, the best way I found to take this in is like one of those old Crunk tapes that seem to drop every other day between 2002 and 2007 from either Houston, Atlanta, or Miami. So if it sounds kind of thrown together, slapdash in its mixing and presentation, and pretty damn meat-headed, well, that's kind of because it is. And maybe it's just my nostalgia for that sound, but while I can clearly recognize some obvious flaws with this approach, I had a lot of fun with this, while realizing exactly what it is and some of its limitations. Now granted, if you're coming in with the conceptual or lyrical expectations from Imperial or Taboo, you're bound to think that this is kind of lazy or even hypocritical coming from someone like Denzel Curry. And if you're seeing this as his Bobby Tarantino moment, I would totally understand why. Because it's absolutely obvious he's punching below his weight class with this project, more than ever riding on some raw energy than anything that's all that intelligent. And that's not to ignore the flaws of a project like this even in that lane, because they are numerous. Both the skits You and Blackland 66.6, they are disposable, they're not particularly funny, and they're clearly here to boost up the track list. Bushy B interlude basically sounds unfinished, and the increasingly shrill chipmunk vocal filter on passages of CAROLMART and Shake 88, they got grating in record time. It's kind of a shame because otherwise I really like the groove and bounce of both songs. And you know what? It is unmistakable that Denzel Curry has simplified his flow and his structure across these cuts, which means that his occasional corny references become a fair bit more obvious. Throw shade on my light, that's a lamp on automatic. Put a red beam to your head like Arby's on Speedboat. And on P.A.T, where he's hollering his lungs out on one of the heaviest songs next to Taboo, we get a guy getting hit with a boom shakalaka. And on the hook from PlayThatBoiZay, where he sounds damn near comical with his rasp, all black, sticks out like I'm Voldemort. A line that might actually work with the atmosphere if you didn't call the wand Styx. And that's not even touching on the references to Dragon Ball Z and Aqua Teen Hunger Force you kind of expect from Denzel Curry. But beyond that, if you're looking at content, it's a lot of gunplay, flexing, Denzel Curry repping his home squad in Miami and specifically Carol City, a few songs about hookups, although thankfully we're spared any sex songs, and enough touches of pitch black nihilism and death around them to provide some context for all the emptiness on display. I mean, Rick Ross ends his verse referencing Nipsey Hussle, Denzel Curry references and gives an RIP to both XXXTentacion and his late brother, and on P.A.T, he says that he carried Curry's hollow tips because it reflects what's in his soul. It's gothic, sure, but it's kind of interesting where a few cuts earlier he says he prefers folks just stay alive however they can, but that might not be the reality in a city that can be as dangerous as this parts of Miami. In other words, you can plug in chunks of ZUU behind movies like Pain and Gain and Spring Breakers set in South Florida, and nothing would feel out of place. And since there's just enough of an emotive core, the emptiness actually kind of makes sense. It works here, it doesn't bother me, that nihilism. Of course, that's a similar justification I've seen behind an act like Future, and given that he's been a perennial frustration of mine, why do similar themes work out for Denzel Curry here? Well, surprisingly, it's not that complicated. It's the production, the tempo, and the energy. None of his pickups are remotely close to being as polished as Future's auto-tune crooning, but that ramshackle mix that ratchets up the rattling abrasion, a plethora of noisy ad-libs, and some huge knocking hooks, it's built for a riotous party and little else. I drew the Crunk comparison before, and that's all the more relevant here. It sounds slapped together and rowdy, and if it does, it's because it is. And Denzel Curry is canny enough to not default to overplayed trap clunkers or a bass knock that's devoid of any tune, which coincidentally, that was my biggest issue with Megan Thee Stallion's last project, which does have some parallels here. Hell, the rattling gurgle, the synth careening off the crushing bass of Ricky, the off-key grinding squeal of BIRDZ that sounds like it's about the last thing Rick Ross would ever rap over, the blaring multi-tracking of the hook and the bass rumble of CAROLMART, the noisy scratch of Shake 88, and then P.A.T basically sounding like a bass-boosted version of itself. I mean, if you hate the rough mixing, I get it, but there are tunes that are at least centered in most of these cuts, and that's where you get the glittery synths and the 90s inspired sample backing up Wish that is remarkably catchy. Probably one of my favorite songs here. And honestly, even despite how rough around the edges they sound, they feel a lot more distinctive and energetic in the modern scene than your standard trap bass of Automatic from Take Heath or the pianos behind Speedboat. Even I would just rate some of those songs being above average in trap just because Denzel Curry's bringing a lot of energy, and there's even some credible melody to support the hooks. Although I prefer the more nasty, rough-edge banger songs here, they're just more effective. But as a whole, honestly, if Denzel Curry had released this as a mixtape, I could have seen him not getting quite as much backlash as he did as the album follow-up to Taboo. And even then, it feels kind of weird to praise Denzel Curry making bangers that feel this disposable. But hell, that was part of Crunk's baseline appeal. Heavy-handed, noisy bangers that live and die on the basis of hooks and production that was cheap and disjointed enough to pick up some menace and yet some unnervy catchingness along the way. And Denzel Curry's got the lean cunning to tap into it and do it well. This is single-minded mosh pit music. And honestly, by that standard, a significant chunk of the album is pretty great at it. Unfortunately, there are a couple tonal choices that didn't quite click even in that lane, and a couple trap concessions that did not need to be here. To say nothing of that lingering annoyance that if Denzel Curry had written down more of this, we could have had a lyrical Crunk project, and that could have been cool. But as such, it's getting a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation, but it is very much a qualified one. If you're expecting this to be a smart follow-up to Imperial or Taboo, it is absolutely not that. But you know what, if you get a fondness for this era of noisy bangers and can see their value in that narrow lane, I think you'll get a summer's worth of fun out of this. So you know what, check your expectations, and then check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this album probably won't quite resonate for everybody coming off of Taboo or Imperial. If you're expecting more lyricism, this is not that. But it's also a lot more fun than something that was defaulting to a more of a basic style, let's say like Schoolboy Q's Crash Talk was, because this is actually fun. So if you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. And I got the poll up there for... Actually, I have no idea how this is going to be received by fans, so there's your opportunity to tell me. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you're looking for that next episode of Billboard Breakdown, it's on the new channel. It's in links in the card right over there. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.